We are going to talk about our runner-ups first, and then we'll get more in depth about our favorite horror movie, or at least how people have decided at this moment in time is their favorite horror movie, because apparently there's a lot of them, according to IMDb. I'll go first with my runner-up. It's The Visit from 2015, M. Night Shyamalan's return to form, I think. He went off the beaten path for a long time, but he came back with The Visit, which is like a found horror footage. Not a lot of people have seen this. Have either of you seen this movie?
No. I have not seen it. I assume you like it because it's about relatives tormenting kids that dropped off there for the weekend, right?
It's a found horror footage thing where two kids who are recording on their phones all the time go to visit their grandparents. And the grandparents have this one rule that the kids are not allowed out of their bed after like a certain time. It's like 9:30 or something like that. They have to stay in their bedroom. And so the first night is they just start hearing all this bizarre stuff going out in the outside of their bedroom door. And then eventually the kids go out, and it is just a terrifying nightmare of an ordeal that they go through. But I think it's really good. It's if people pass it off because it's Shyamalan, I think it's worth checking out. I would recommend it. So Amanda, do you want to go next with your runner-up?
Sure. My runner-up was The Witch, which I
just watched recently, for the first time.
God, I just love it. I know we're not supposed to go super in depth right now about our runner-ups, but I have to say that it's not, the sort of nonstop horror slasher film that people would typically think of when they think horror. But if you are interested in something that is more atmospheric and has more going on beneath the surface, and I would argue one of the best endings for the more recent generation of horror movies, I highly recommend it.
And if you like goats.
Yeah, I mean, I have a Black Phillip plushie.
Do you really?
Yes, I do. That tells you something about me.
I didn't think that Black Phillip was going to pay off the way it did in that movie, and I'm really happy that it did. I'm not going to say what that means.
There's a goat in the movie. Spoilers. Clay, what's your runner-up?
My runner-up is John Carpenter's The Thing, because there's nothing I like more than a movie about a bunch of bearded men isolated alone.
It's your life.
I realize we should have probably done this at the top. How do you define a horror movie?
How do I define a horror movie?
What's the difference between a horror movie and a thriller?
I think generally, I guess when you say thriller, I picture Michael Douglas.
I picture Michael Jackson.
Ooh, yeah. Well, which is ironically a horror movie. Scariest zombie movie I've ever seen. Not even being silly about that.
See, I would classify The Shining as a thriller and not a horror movie, but I know that's not a popular opinion.
That's a tough call, though, because I feel like generally if there's supernatural stuff involved, it's kind of horror by default, but I know what you mean. I get what you're saying. But yeah, how would I define a horror? I guess scary, I guess. I don't know. How would you guys define it? I guess I've never really thought about it before.
I would define...
Because there are some things that I would consider a horror movie that aren't really a horror movie on the surface, like The Wicker Man.
What about Jaws? Do you consider Jaws a horror movie?
I think Jaws is, yeah, why not? It's on the line. I don't think it's a traditional horror movie, but I think you could I wouldn't be surprised if I found that in the horror aisle at Blockbuster.
Horror to me has to be either exaggerated or, as you said, supernatural on some level.
Yeah.
It can't be like a realistic thing. So Jaws would be a thriller to me. And same with The Shining is tough, but I lean more towards thriller for Shining as well. Horror would be obviously the slasher movies, things that are like psychological evil spirit type stuff is pure horror. But Amanda, who would you define it any differently, or do you have anything to add on to that?
I think my definition is more in line with yours, Wes, than with Clay's. I don't want to say that there has to be a supernatural element or even that there has to be an element of violence, but I think it just has to... I don't know. I can't define it better than I think you did, Wes, where like I also have similar feelings towards things like Jaws and The Shining, where I don't really consider them horror movies. If I were to open up my personal, very intuitive definition of horror movies, I probably would have said that Silence of the Lambs was in my top 2, but I consider that more of a thriller. and I don't really know.
Saw would be a good
Alien?
example. Saw is a thriller and not a horror, according to my definition, which is tough.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know if I would.
See, then there I disagree with you. There I swing
'cause if
back.
You think
you're going
Jigsaw's sort of
based on-
supernatural, or you think it's just the horrific gruesomeness of it is enough
Well,
to
no,
make it?
yeah. If you're
Yeah.
going with supernatural and or heightened reality, I think Saw falls under that pretty well.
Hmm.
What about Alien? I would consider Alien a horror movie.
Alien's a horror movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can say aliens are kind of supernatural, I guess, they'd fall into that definition
true.
for me.
Outside of our known reality.
Yes, exactly. They're made up, I guess would be a good way to they exist, but they're totally made up in this movie. Let's go, Amanda. You want to piggyback? We'll go back. You didn't start, actually. Who went last? Clay, you went last, so we'll do a little snake draft here. You go first with your first choice.
My first choice is Evil Dead 2, because it's one of those movies where even though it's not the scariest movie I've ever seen, that movie's kind of just like the Venn diagram of who I am, I think, because it's got scary stuff in it.
Evil and also dead.
Yeah, and with human skin for a face, much like the Book of the Dead has.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary, but it also is very darkly funny. And it also has a bit of a, I hesitate to call it a superhero element, but it has that sort of, Ash, he builds a chainsaw hand and gears himself up to fight demons. I mean, it's
Sounds like a thriller to me.
Yeah, it's pretty comic booky, but it manages to walk that line very adeptly. And is that the right word? Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah.
And I've just always loved it. It just hits all of the right marks for me.
Amanda, you're up.
I have to say Halloween, and I say it not because it scares me, but just because it's such an iconic classic, and I think what it did for the genre of horror movies, of slasher movies, just knowing that it sort of took this concept that, scary movies were monsters, like supernatural monsters. They were Dracula and the Wolfman and Frankenstein. And instead it took it into this very safe, normal, Anytown, USA suburbia setting and said, you're not safe there. And I think that's a depth that it added to the horror genre overall that wasn't there before. And so I love it for that, and I love it for Jamie Lee Curtis.
It's weird that was so revolutionary, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you look at, you had your Texas Chainsaw Massacres, but that's very much still people going into a new area,
Exactly.
an unknown thing instead of the unknown coming to them.
Yeah.
And that never really happened in a non-supernatural way for 40 years from the beginning of horror movies up until then.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, 50 years, 45.
Sure.
I agree. We covered Halloween as a patron special, actually, last year on Halloween. So people are interested, they can check that out. I'm going to go with Hereditary is my first pick. 2018 came out last year. Ari Aster is this new hotshot horror director who did Midsommar as his latest thing this year.
Have you seen Midsommar yet?
I have
Wes?
not seen that one yet.
Oh, love it.
Me either.
I tend to I'm only like in contrast to you guys where you both had sort of there's a character at the center of your horror stories. I tend to not be scared by slasher movies, but I'm like emotionally devastated by psychological horror movies. Hereditary, we watched it months ago, and Amy still brings it up as like something that is like terrifying her at night. Like I can't go out to the bathroom at night and walk down a dark hallway without picturing a half illuminated naked man standing at the end of it, just standing there.
That's so good.
And it just sticks with you, and it's so disturbing that I just find it so much more effective at scaring me than any of these sort of like character-based horror movies ever do, just because it's just something that whenever you walk into same with Going Into the Attic has never been the same since like watching Record or Wreck. You know that movie?
Oh, yeah.
Things like that. Just imagining like if you hear a bump upstairs, it's like someone like that dragging around. But Hereditary, it's fucking terrifying. I recommend everyone watch it. I assume you both have seen it.
It is really, it's really good.
Yeah, it's very good. I know what you mean, Wes. I actually had a similar experience after seeing, of all movies, Paranormal Activity.
Really?
Which I think is very effectively done. Because after I went to see it with my girlfriend, who if you feel like you're numb to horror movies, my girlfriend will go see it with you, and it will reinvigorate how scary you find movies, because she just amps everything way up.
She's got the best scream.
Yeah. And after we came back, the place that she lived at the time was very much had that sort of kind of layout to the Paranormal Activity house.
Yeah, it did.
And so we were asleep, or I keep later hours than she does. So she was asleep and I was trying to go to sleep, and I heard someone come up the stairs and stop directly in front of her door and just stand there. And I was losing my shit. Because we had just seen that movie, I was going nuts, and eventually they kept going up the stairs. In reality, it was probably someone coming home drunk and stopping there on their way to their room to look at their phone or something.
Yeah.
But in my mind, it was like the Pazuzu demon or whatever it was that they called up in that movie. And when I went to the bathroom afterwards, I put on as many lights as I could from there to the bathroom.
No, I remember being scared by Paranormal Activity. It's a terrifying idea.
It's a good movie.
Yeah.
I fell asleep during it.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Did you watch it on TV?
No, I watched it on DVD in somebody's dorm room, and I was just like, I'm bored. Good night.
Yeah.
I am incredibly, I'm incredibly drunk.
I'm extraordinarily numb. If we're going to go briefly off on tangents about movies, something that legitimately scared me was in the Ryan Reynolds remake of Amityville Horror.
Really?
Yeah, which is objectively not a great movie and not a very good scary movie. But there is one scene where the little boy in the family, like mostly asleep, gets out of bed and like kind of trots his adorable self down the hallway and into the bathroom. And while he's peeing, you can see him in the mirror, and the camera angle changes. And when it changes back, there is something horrifying behind him really, really suddenly in the light. Like all the darkness he goes through, nothing in the light. And that has always just...
Have you guys seen Sinister, the movie with Ethan Hawke?
Yes.
The lawnmower videotape in that movie is terrifying.
That's pretty good.
There's a video. The premise of the movie is that he finds all these videotapes of people who lived in the house previously who have like killed themselves or murdered their families. And there's one that is shot POV of a lawnmower running at night, like just running back and forth on the lawn with someone pushing it with the point of the view of the camera. And it is fucking terrifying. It's well worth watching just for that shot. Yeah. Anyway, that's it. We are, this is basically a little ad for Real Ripe and Real Rotten. If you enjoyed this content, you can check out the podcast. There'll be a link down below. There'll be a little link on the screen. You can click it. Let us know what your favorite horror movie is. Otherwise, we're done. See ya.